in the New Zealand media this morning that some of those videos are still available and have been found on Facebook and YouTube and Instagram. Given that you have all told us many times before about the systems that you have in place to take down terrorist material, why have your systems failed so badly in this case? And perhaps we could start with Facebook.
Thank you, Chair. First, I would like to say that our hearts at Facebook go out to the victims of the tragedy, both in New Zealand and the recent Easter tragedy in Sri Lanka. In the case of New Zealand, first and foremost, our priority was to help the New Zealand law enforcement, and we did that immediately after by sending members of our law enforcement response team to be on the ground to support the investigation. I will like to point out that we were able to remove the content, the video, within 10 minutes after the video was flagged to us by New Zealand law enforcement. But what we saw was over 800 variants of that video appear on the platform. Within the first 24 hours, we were able to remove 1.5 million different copies, 1.2 at the initial stages of upload using our automated technology, and an additional 300,000. Unfortunately, we recognized that this was an adversarial space. The attacker used a network of his friends or colleagues on a separate platform, 8chan in this case, to spread this, to make it go viral. They deliberately chose to be adverse to our policies, adverse to our systems. They used things like splicing and cutting of the video. They used things like filters to subvert our automation. Now, our automation is strong. We were able to immediately upload and share with our fellow colleagues here as members of the Global Internet Forum for Counterterrorism. But automation isn't perfect. While it learns, it does have difficulty understanding different filters, different angles of the same video, different use of audio technology. We realize this is an adversarial space. We want to make it hostile. But it is the case that as more variants come online, they may appear on our platform. But to date, we have shared with these companies as well as others within the GIFCT I believe, over 800, almost 900 variants of that video today.
So do you think there are still versions of that video on your platform now?
Chair, it's hard for me to say. I think we're doing an excellent job of removing it. The machine learning does learn over time. So as we see a video, it can teach itself of what to look for. Is there a possibility that one video exists that has changed audio, a different filter, a different angle? It's possible. I'm unfamiliar with seeing those copies. I know we're doing a lot of work and investment there, but it is possible.
So if the Global Intellectual Property Enforcement Centre that's reported in the New Zealand media this morning is referring to having found videos on your platform, are you aware of that and have you taken those down?
Sure, I'm not aware of that, but if I will definitely follow up with you and also make sure my teams follow up with those folks in New Zealand to identify those copies, and we will remove them and then also add them to our what we call our hash database and share them with the companies at this table.
The difficulty that we have with this is that this is an issue that we have raised with all of you many times before, and this issue about uploading, re-uploading, taking a screenshot of it, surely this is not new. Surely you have been aware of this as a problem when it comes to dealing with child abuse images, when it comes to dealing with Islamist jihadi propaganda, with all kinds of other videos and propaganda. I cannot believe that Christchurch was the first time you had people attempt to game your system.
Chair, I'm sure. This is not the first time that people have tried to subvert our system. That's correct. And in many cases, our systems are able to function very efficiently and remove the content. This time it was unique because of the use of the live platform, the first-person perspective that the shooting took, as well as media sharing many copies of this and people then filming it with their phones, which created its own set of issues. We're committed to investing into our artificial intelligence, our machine learning, our automation to surface and remove these videos as quickly as possible. But there is still progress to be made with machine learning. It is not perfect. It's not infallible today.
But you've had live streams again before where you've had problems with this. This is not the first time you've had a live stream video that has been a problem.
That is correct, Chair. But to be clear, this is the first time we've, unfortunately, events like Christchurch are very rare. So this is the first case that we've seen this type of activity. It does take a machine multiple times, thousands of times even, to recognize what type of violence, what type of imagery it is seeing so it can learn from itself and then enact our proper policies.
So again, what other organisations say is that you refuse help from outside organisations, that you don't invest enough money in this kind of thing, and that's why you've still got such a problem with being unable to take it down fast enough.
I would strongly object to that, Chair. We have made significant investments since the last time we've appeared before your committee. My colleague Simon Milner, I believe, appeared in 2017. Three areas where we have made just tremendous amount of investments and resources are in our people. We are now over 30,000 people that work on safety and security. Many of those subject matter experts that rate the policies, that have law enforcement, intelligence, and other backgrounds that study counterterror. We have over 15,000 content moderators now. And importantly, we have a full suite of engineers that focus directly on these issues to build out our product. The second part is our product, our artificial intelligence automation. Again, it's not perfect. We have made significant investment, but it will take time for artificial intelligence to improve. Not infallible, but it is a big lever for us to pull and leverage against this type of harmful content. And third is our partnerships. Again, with companies like those at the table in the GIFCT, we're committed to that, but we also work with a full variety of external advisors, academics, civil society, NGOs, as well as government. So we realize that these are tremendous problems, and we need to take all those measures to combat it.
But again, given that we've been raising this issue with you for some time, it is just very hard to see why something as basic as just re-editing it or splicing it and so on should cause you such problems. In March of 2017, we raised, admittedly this started as a YouTube issue, we first raised the issue about national action videos. In December, which was clearly illegal far-right extremist propaganda, when in December of that same year we raised again with YouTube the fact that that video kept appearing. We were told in an evidence session that all three of your companies were represented at. They are sometimes manipulated, so you have to work out how they are manipulated in order to take news versions down. We're now looking at removing them faster. I think we'll be closing that gap with the help of machines. I raised that particularly with Simon Milner at that time as well. We raised it again with William McCants at YouTube in March 2018, who said sometimes when there's a variation, the technology will not automatically take it down, we'll send it for review. This hashing technology was developed years ago, and we have been raising this issue about people trying to game the system for years with you now, and that is why it is so hard to believe that this was so difficult for you still to deal with, and the way in which you talk about it suggests, well, that this was just a new thing you had to deal with in the awful circumstances of Christchurch. Mr. Potts?
I want to be clear. The thematic overview of these issues is not new. These challenges have existed, and we have worked and invested heavily to remedy these issues on our platform to combat this type of hate. This instance of the video, this type of video, was a new type of video. We had not seen that before, or our machine learning had not seen that before. Therefore, it is harder for our machine learning to
Why was it a new type of video?
This was a first-person, essentially. And not to be too glib about it, it's a first-person shooter video, one where we have someone using a GoPro helmet with a camera focused from their perspective of shooting. Now, if we had different angles where this was a third-party video that shows it, perhaps our systems would have been faster, because we have seen that type of content before. We have not seen the content from the actual angle of the shooter, the attacker in that situation.
Okay, but so everybody knew within a very short time of this happening, you knew in a very short time of this happening that this was a huge shooting attack, a criminal attack, and a terrorist attack. So that was known very quickly.
That's correct.
So I don't understand why the angle of the camera was significant in terms of you then being able to take down all of the material, the uploads and the re-uploads.
I want to be clear, Chair, then with our partners. That is one variant. So that variant, the variant from the shooter's perspective, we were very fast to get that. Other variants that did not resemble the exact shooter's perspective, that we had the exact hash or digital fingerprint, made it more difficult. So if you turn those angles at certain ways, you dub over soundtracks, you add filters, that will subvert our system to some degree. Now the systems will learn, and they will learn very quickly, But there is still time. In this space, again, because of those members on 8chan, they purposefully uploaded many copies, not only to Facebook, they uploaded them to YouTube, they uploaded them to Twitter, with the purpose of spreading it wide. They uploaded them to message sharing sites that I've never heard of, with the intention of just making those things spread and go viral.
Okay.
By doing that, it does present a challenge to any AI.
Okay, I think it is just very difficult to understand why, when these same issues were being raised directly with you by us, and if we were raising them in the very infrequent select committee hearings that we had with you, I can't believe that a whole load of other people, including police and law enforcement, weren't raising this with you far more frequently. So it's still very hard to understand why this should take so long to develop the technology to address it. But can I ask you, because you just referred then to the people who were deliberately doing so, have you identified all of the users who were doing that, and have they been banned from Facebook?
We have identified obviously the shooter, and he's been banned from Facebook. We have identified and removed content from users who were sharing. We do not have direct links back at this time to people who were perhaps within his core set of individuals on that 8chan system to share it, but we have removed numbers of individuals who were sharing it as well.
So you've removed all of the individuals who were deliberately sharing and kind of uploading, changing in order to game your system. Sheryl Sandberg has talked about a community of bad actors. Have you identified all of those people, and have you banned them from Facebook?
We have identified some people and banned them from Facebook. There were also people who uploaded, I want to be clear, there were people who uploaded videos that were shared by bad actors. So a bad actor shares the video, someone else downloads that video, but without the intention of knowing that they're being a bad actor, they upload that, and then we just apply our normal penalties. Where we remove the video, they get certain escalating penalties, but they were not necessarily removed from Facebook. Okay,
but you have removed the people who you think were doing so deliberately?
We have removed, yes.
And have you reported them to the police?
We are working closely with the New Zealand law enforcement.
Have you reported them to the police?
It's an active investigation, ma'am. I want to respect the investigation. I'm not a lawyer for the company.
The reason that this is significant is because we've been told by the Counter-Terror Chief, Commander Neil Basu here, that very often the social media companies do not report to the police incidents which are clearly involved breaking the law, that although you might remove content, that you don't refer it to the police. So that's why I think this is a significant question about whether or not you have referred information to the police about individuals who were deliberately uploading in order to spread terrorist propaganda.
Yes, Chair. Just to want to point out that we do work closely with law enforcement. If there is an imminent threat of harm or risk, we do refer those things proactively to law enforcement. So I'm not familiar with the chief or the person you mentioned in his statement, but we do refer to law enforcement in many cases of imminent threat. We also respond to requests for data and information when we receive proper legal process. That is, I believe, happening in New Zealand, and we are responding. I don't have the information of exactly what we have shared with them at this time.
Okay,
and the investigation's
so just in terms of your policies, if you identify illegal content, so not simply content that violates your standards, but illegal content, perhaps it might be a death threat, perhaps it might be the sharing of terrorist propaganda, and so on, that you rightly remove, do you also report that to the law enforcement in that country? And Neil Basu, by the way, is Assistant Commissioner Neil Basu, who is the head of counter-terrorism for the Metropolitan Police and for the whole country in this country. Okay,
I apologize for not knowing him. We do. So in the case that we are, I won't say certain, but we think that there is an imminent threat of harm, of physical harm, we do refer those. So whether that's terrorism, whether that is other types of crime, whether that's a threat against, unfortunately, members of this body have received threats, whether it's a threat against an individual, private individual, we will refer that to local law enforcement in hopes that they will intervene. Okay, and that is where there's life or limb risk. But if there isn't, if the actual simply the posting of a video or something itself is in itself an illegal act, so it is the promotion of terrorist propaganda, would you report that to the police? I think those are case specific. It's hard to answer in the hypothetical. If it is just one posting of a piece of propaganda, I would say we most likely would not. We do investigations, but if we find that the person is somehow connected to an organization and or contemplating some other larger scale attack, we would then refer it. Sure, but there is a criminal threshold
involved, so the actual post, the material itself might pass a criminal threshold. So I'm not asking you about, I understand you will have policies, very sensible policies around where people, there is an imminent risk. I'm asking you those situations where there is not imminent risk, there nevertheless, in that country will be evidence that a crime has been committed. Would you refer that to the police?
Chair, I think it would depend on the crime. If we understood what crime was being committed, there are obviously different scales of crimes that are criminal.
Okay, a crime's a crime.
That's fair.
To the police.
We do not report all crimes to the police. We do report those imminent threats again, and we do respond to requests for information about crime.
And how do you decide what counts then as a crime? And who are you to decide what's a crime that should be reported and what's a crime that shouldn't be reported on your platform?
We have a very developed process. We have teams that come from law enforcement backgrounds, FBI. We have people who work in the UK law enforcement and globally in other law enforcement agencies to help us develop those processes, where we then create our own threshold, a credible threshold of what we believe is imminent, and then we will pass that on. But to be frank, I know part of this hearing is to discuss potential regulation and oversight from government. These are areas where there are tough decisions, and decisions that we are making on our own, that these companies here are making on our own. And these are places where government can give us more guidance and more scrutiny about what we should be sharing.
Okay. Turn to Twitter. So how long did it take you to remove the copies of this video?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for inviting Twitter to testify. The effort is ongoing. So far, we've removed 26,700 tweets. We first should state that the video was not uploaded to Twitter in its original form. You cannot, as an average user, upload a video of more than 2 minutes and 20 seconds. Like other companies, we saw multiple variants of the video. We saw 300 different copies on our platform. But similar to Facebook, we removed the perpetrator's account before the New Zealand police asked us to and before he was arrested.
And what have you done to be able to identify different versions and different variants of this video? Or have you simply relied on Facebook or others to tell you which are the different variants?
Yeah, I think there's a few things here. First, Brad Smith wrote a blog for Microsoft that puts it very well. There are two big lessons learned for all of us. The first is exactly this issue. We all need to get better at identifying different variations of this content, and that has to be a priority. And second of all, the importance of a crisis response or command centre was another learning, I think, that the GIFCT that we all work through was set up principally for programmatic work. It's effective with things like research and tech innovation and hash database. And on the day, while we were able to respond to the emergency and set up a specific repository for Christchurch content, I think we all felt that it wasn't particularly process-driven, and that a priority for all of us is to look at something like a command centre for the future.
You see, the trouble is that when you talk about learning lessons, is it feels like if we have been raising this with you, 18 months ago we were explicitly raising this issue of deliberate attempts to change videos and so on to be able to raise them again. It is so difficult to understand why this was a shock to you all when it happened in this case. Why are you always so reactive?
I think for Twitter specifically, because of the limits on video length, we tend to see URLs being shared rather than the original content. So something we have done over the past year is set up a different database for URLs. And that's, when we add something to the database, we can all proactively surface that content on our platform. So in thinking about different versions of videos, that's part of this effort in trying to think about how the video is emerging on different platforms in different locations.
And have you made efforts to identify the people who were deliberately spreading this terrorist propaganda on your platform?
Yeah, I think it's a really difficult challenge. I mean, the first thing I should say is we did our own analysis at Twitter, and we found that 70% of the video views were shared by 62 verified accounts, so kind of traditional media outlets. So I think there's a learning there in terms of our partnership with the wider media ecosystem on the day, which Neil Basu has raised. I think the other thing is, to come back to your point on working with the police, you know, on the morning of the attack, I was at a police conference running a training session to guide police officers in how they can make requests to Twitter for data. We were having meetings with the College of Policing to think about how we can scale that across the country, and with NTAC to discuss the upcoming implementation of the Cloud Act. So we do take very seriously the partnership we have with law enforcement and the concerns they raise.
So 30% were not the main, was it mainstream media, the 70%?
Yeah.
So, and so what discussions have you had with them?
This is something I raised with the Home Office on the morning of the attack and in discussions since, and we would welcome opportunities to be part of that discussion. But, you know, like Mr. Potts was talking about, we saw users inadvertently breaking our rules, sharing content, condemning what happened, and expressing solidarity with the victims. So, you know, I think there's another bit of this on our part to clarify our rules and provide greater understanding to our users about those issues when they may inadvertently break the rules and the actions we will take.
So have you made an effort to distinguish between people who were thoughtlessly sharing in order to condemn, or media, mainstream media, who were again making a very poor editorial judgment that they later changed, and those who were deliberately promoting it in the same way that Facebook talk about those who were deliberately promoting it in order to escalate and promote terrorist material? Have you made that distinction, and have you tried to identify those who were doing it deliberately to spread terrorist propaganda?
We are in the midst of our own internal review, and I will of course keep the committee updated. But, you know, to come back to the point about terrorist content on our platforms, Twitter has now removed 1.4 million accounts for the promotion of terrorism. And I think the director of the FBI was asked this, you know, would you like platforms to give you that data set? And it's complicated, you know, already terrorism is often described as trying to find the needle in the haystack, and the last thing we want to do is provide a great deal more hay. So that's very much a question for law enforcement.
Well, isn't the reality of your problem is that actually, even if you were willing to do this, it wouldn't really make any difference because you don't know who any of those people are because of your policies on anonymity?
Like I said, we work closely with the police, and when they make requests to us for information, we can provide
I know, but I'm not asking about when you react. I'm asking about if there were people on your platform who were deliberately spreading terrorist propaganda, whether you are able to identify them and to report them.
We're in a similar position
yes or no?
to Facebook, that if there is a threat to life,
I'm not asking about threat. I'm asking about
police.
whether you are capable of identifying people who may be spreading terrorist propaganda on your platforms.
Like I said, when there is a threat to life, we will reach out to law enforcement where we have relationships.
Okay, I'm not asking about whether there's a threat to life. I'm asking about people who are spreading terrorist propaganda, who are breaking the law, whether or not you are capable of identifying them and reporting them to the police. Are you capable of doing so, yes or no?
There are plenty of signals we can use that I'd rather not go into in a public setting, but I'm very happy to follow up with the chair after this session.
That would be very helpful. YouTube. Can I ask you what you did to take down material, and also whether you believe, as reported in the New Zealand media today, there are still such videos from the Christchurch shooting on your platform?
Thank you, Chair. I will not repeat some of the things that were already mentioned by my colleagues, but indeed there are three elements that were very important on the day. First and foremost, the use of our algorithms, the use of our machines. We invested a lot in that, and I think that in terms of capturing the original video, the machine did their job, because once we got from the law enforcement the original video, we were able to hash the video and identify the video and block the same video. In relation to the re-upload, and we are talking about, at the end of the day, something like 200,000 pieces of content that we took down. The challenge was, as was said by Katie, also the presence in the different upload of pieces of the video of authoritative sources. what we learned from that, and this is like the second big improvement that we made also in terms of for the future to change our policies, is to make sure that if there is a match now of the same pieces of video uploaded on the platform, instead of going up online, this goes directly for review. And so I would like to look into this piece of news that I'm not aware of to try to better understand how it's possible that still pieces of the video identified by the machine were not sent by the review, and I assume that from the review only authoritative sources would have been authorized for upload. But I would like also to stress one other point, which is the collaboration between our companies, which is something new, which is something positive that was not there in the past. During the day, we were able to share thousands of pieces of videos, and that's across the different platforms, and that really helped us to really catch up with the huge amount of uploads. The second is the collaboration with law enforcement. Of course, I mentioned the collaboration with the New Zealand one, but when these things happens, our team, I did in the past, get in touch directly with the law enforcement at European level, at APAC level, in all the different regions, to try to understand better where we need to focus our efforts, where we can work together in order to make sure that we are up to the threat. So I would say that this was absolutely horrific. When we woke up in the morning, we took over from our colleagues in APAC. We were absolutely shocked by everything was happening, but we did everything was possible, and I think in the areas that you identified, in particular the fact that our machine were not in the aftermath of the event incapable to distinguish, for example, when something was clarification or when something was authoritative source, we have now made an improvement which is blocking all the different pieces of content from going online. So hopefully, as we've seen actually this week in Sri Lanka, issues like that will not happen again.
Okay, but again, it was specifically YouTube that raised this, that responded and talked to us about this in previous evidence sessions. So William McCants told us 12 months ago, sometimes where there is a variation, the technology will not automatically take it down, we'll send it for review. We are fine-tuning our technology so we spot even smaller clips. But 12 months on, you're still not able to do that.
So actually, and that's the improvement that we made, unlikely because of this horrific event, the rule that William described to you, so that the match is identified, there is a doubt, it's not the same video, then it goes for review. In the future, in case of horrific events like Christchurch, the content is not going up online and then is reviewed. Is blocked, is reviewed, and only after approved can go online.
So, up until now, although it gets sent to review, it's basically still been allowed on YouTube.
To put in the right context, when we're saying that it's sent for review, we need to consider that for this kind of violation, for example, 90% of the content that is sent for review and then is taken down, so for terrorist propaganda or this kind of violation of our policies, the content is taken down with less than 10 views. So the machine already today, in the context that was described by William, are working, are allowing us to take down a lot of content in a very fast way. What we are changing, because of the unprecedented, for the specific threat that facts like Christchurch represent, is even in this case, not let the content go up online, send it for review, only when it's approved, then it's going to be available online.
Okay, but the New Zealand media report today has quote from Eric Feinberg of Global Intellectual Property Enforcement Centre, who talks about the YouTube videos that they found sometime after the attack that have now been removed as a result of them reporting it, only as a result of them reporting it, which he says, hundreds of thousands of people had access to those videos. The YouTube video we took down had over 720,000 views. Is that correct?
So, I'm very sorry, but I'm not aware of this piece of information. I would like, if it's possible, to go back to the team and ask a confirmation, because the rule that we have implemented after Christchurch would not allow pieces of content which are linked to any glorification of this fact to go up online.
Okay, but again, this is something that we have repeatedly raised with you, and for some of this, at the time of the Christchurch attack, it had a content warning up. So you had material, you had bits of these videos that were up within 8 hours with a content warning, so you have enough information to flash it up as a problem, but not to take it down.
Again, if we look at the policies that we have implemented and the algorithm that we have implemented, there are different level of implementation and enforcement of the policies. If it's about the same video is blocked. If it's about pieces of the same video, this is sent for review. In the case of something like Christchurch, we change our policy, so it's not even going up online. It has to be reviewed by a human. In any case, if there is a doubt, it's escalated. So I think in the comprehensive approach that we are taking to this kind of content, there can always be issues like the one that is mentioned there, and I want to look into that and come back to you with more information. But I think we have a robust approach to try to face the threat.
And again, have you identified people who you believe to have been deliberately promoting this in order to deliberately promote terrorist propaganda?
Of course, we have identified, and violation of this kind will lead into blocking the account, taking down the channel. Absolutely. In terms of working with law enforcement, it's a very delicate issue. Why? Because there are two elements to take in consideration. On one side, the need of collaborate together with law enforcement in order to make sure that the evidence from this crime is collected in a way which is in line with the law of the country where the crime is committed. That requires, for example, in most of the cases, for this kind of very dangerous act, to freeze the evidence, wait for a request from the law enforcement to acquire the evidence, and then deliver the evidence in order to make sure that the evidence can be acquired in a form that then can be actually used against the criminals.
So you wait for requests from law enforcement in order to give them information. You don't identify something that is illegal on your platform and report it to the police?
According to the different jurisdictions, we work together with the law enforcement in order to make sure that in the respect of the due process of law, we hand over the information in a way which makes sure that the criminals can be persecuted.
But again, this comes back to the issue raised by Assistant Commissioner Neil Basu,
Sure.
who says that all of your platforms are removing things that are illegal, but you are not reporting it to them. So do you actively report to the police within a jurisdiction if you identify content that is illegal? Not just against your guidelines but not illegal, but material that itself is a crime. Do you report those cases to the police?
We have policies that are in line to the one of our colleagues. But I want
so
to
the answer
stress,
is no?
But I want to stress that it's very, very important to work on these issues, and I did this also in the past when I was working, of course, on issues of less relevant, like, for example, e-commerce, to work together with law enforcement in order to make sure that the evidence is acquired in the right way.
That's fine. That's a fine line. It's
yes.
very good that you do that. It's very good that you want to take the right kind of digital evidence. That's fine. But the issue is whether or not you are letting the law enforcement know about crimes being committed on your platforms. And so it's just a real concern because you are effectively making these crimes possible. You are facilitating these crimes. And I accept that you are doing much more than you were 18 months ago to then respond to them and to take that material down. But you are not actually reporting the crimes that your platforms are making possible. Surely that is a serious problem for people right across the world who want to make sure that crimes are not being committed.
It's a very fair point. I want to stress that we discuss these issues with Europol every week. We have a conference call with the people at the Europol every week. And we came to a place where we decided that the best way is to work together, identify, for example, trends, identify areas where we want to improve, and then find the right process accordingly to the applicable laws to make sure that the evidence are acquired in the proper way.
I've been just concentrating on something which is just a very clear-cut case where it's about terrorist propaganda, where you all accept that it is wrong, that it is illegal and that it should be removed. But it seems to me that time and again you are simply not keeping up with the scale of the problem and the scale of criminal and terrorist activity and doing the things that we all as communities across the world need you to be doing. Do you have a concern that the way that the Sri Lanka government has responded, actually countries and governments are being forced into actually this very strong reaction because they have no confidence in your ability to sort things, even if that might have all kinds of wider repercussions by banning your platforms for a temporary period, even if that causes huge problems for people, but they're being forced to do so because they say they don't have confidence in your abilities. Aren't you concerned that that is going to happen more often if you can't get your act together? Who would like to respond?
I would like to first stress that our focus after the horrific events in Sri Lanka was to first and foremost make sure that we applied the procedures that we described before. So we identify the attackers, we work together with law enforcement in making sure that they, if they have a channel, if they have a presence on the platform, this is closed. Identify, make sure that when people is searched, the facts are developing and who is the group that is actually accused of the facts, and then take action on the channel. This is something that we have done in the last hours. So that was our focus. On the decision of the government, of course, this is a decision of a government, and we need to respect this. There are voices from civil society, voices from journalist organizations that are raising concern on the fact that this is also impairing the possibility to actually communicate and understand better what's happening there. So, but this is a different issue. I think our focus at the moment was not to answer to the decision of the government from Sri Lanka, was to make sure that we have our house in order.
Well, I think my question is whether you think you have any responsibility to make sure that countries don't end up in that situation and needing to react in that way, or deciding that they want to react in that kind of way because they can have confidence in your platforms to be able to act in the way that they need you to.
I'll go. Thank you, Chair. I appreciate the question. And as my colleague here said, that the ethnic violence, the targeting of someone at worship is one of the most despicable acts. And again, our hearts go out to those that were impacted by the bombings on Easter. I believe we do have a responsibility under our policies to enforce our community standards to ensure that that type of hate, that type of terrorism, that type of violence is not on our platform, and we do that swiftly. In the immediate aftermath of this attack, we designated the event, designated the individuals as terrorists, and we were removing that content, sharing much of it with our colleagues here. And for certain other, I will say, where we have seen other types of ethnic violence or terrorism, we have invested significantly, as we have in Sri Lanka, with the 30,000 people that now work on safety and security. We have dedicated teams that focus on these markets, that we have language experts, subject matter experts on the challenges they face, and we really want to work with partners on the ground so we better understand it. I do, as my colleague said, communication after any type of this event is important. I think it's a way for families, loved ones to connect, and so we really do feel that it is better to have an open internet, because that is how people are able to know if someone is safe. In fact, on Facebook, we have a system called Safety Check after any, whether it's a natural disaster, unfortunately an event like this. And many people use Safety Check after the events in Sri Lanka. Obviously, they can't do that now after the blockage of the internet. We would rather see that to be open, but we share many of the same concerns as the Sri Lankan government. Their constituents, their citizens are our community, and we have the same goals of wanting to keep them safe. And we respect their way of going about that. We think that it would be better for it to be open, for our open communication, but I do understand.
Stephen Doughty.
So my problem is I don't think you're even getting some of the basics right in terms of the material that's used to radicalise those who carry out such horrific attacks in the first place. And when all three of your companies appeared before this committee some time ago, you all admitted that you were not proactively searching for other organisations, so far right, extreme right wing, Northern Irish terrorist organisations and others. It was basically in the middle that the entire focus had been on Islamist organisations, and that you weren't routinely searching for prescribed or other problematic organisations. And I've raised some very, very specific concerns about far right content, particularly relating to an organisation called Radio Aryan and another organisation called System Resistance Network. Now, Twitter, you said a moment ago, we all need to get better at identifying content beyond videos and everything else, and you've got a URL database. So why did you have for so long an account on your site actually called @RadioAryan that was providing links to the most disgusting anti-Semitic, Islamophobic, homophobic, racist, far-right content? Why did you allow that account to exist?
Thank you. First, if I could just outline our rules in this space, because I think that would be helpful for the committee.
Well, no. I'd like to know why that account was allowed to exist, and then why it was subsequently taken down only after a media report involving myself and others.
So at the beginning of your question, you asked about proactive searching, and we said last week it was unacceptable that we were solely relying on user reports to find and identify violations of our rules. Now, 38% of the enforcement action we take on abuse is identified through our own internal.
Okay, so that's very interesting. But why was that account at a very basic level? An account. We're not talking about even a link. We're talking about the account is called @RadioAryan on Twitter. Why was that allowed to be up on your site for so long?
I'm not familiar with the details of that specific account.
Even though that was reported to you by myself.
I'm not familiar with that.
Okay, so you also have accounts, I looked last night, even though you've now removed the main account, you've got other accounts linking to that content. You've got other accounts linking to the Daily Stormer, which is a well-known US neo-Nazi site, which includes a link to an article I found in 3 Minutes last night, which says that the New Zealand killer bears no responsibility and it was a legitimate revenge attack. Why are there links to those very well known? I'm not talking about deeply hidden organisations or links. Why are there links to organisations like that in full public view on your platform?
I'm aware of high-profile accounts and individuals on the platform, and when those accounts are reported to us, we take it very seriously and we review those. Well,
you didn't, because it took weeks for you to remove Radio Aryan when I reported it to you.
We've now designated almost 100 white supremacist, nationalist or separatist groups to date.
But apparently not the Daily Stormer, which is one of the most well-known neo-Nazi websites in the US.
We have a number of ongoing assessments as we do day in. We have no interest in having violent extremist groups on our platform, but we can't ban our way out of this.
No, but that's just words, because this is the basics. We're not talking about deep hidden content here. We're talking about the basics of very, very well known, publicly reported and identified organisations that are of concern to law enforcement organisations across the world and a range of NGO, Hope Not Hate, other organisations that have identified these, let alone this committee, members of this committee raising them. And you're still providing links to the most basic of these organisations.
No, I mean, for us, the priority is going to be using technology to identify accounts that break our rules. Safety is our top priority as a company, and we will continue to invest in tools that help us surface those accounts for review.
So will you be ensuring that Radio Aryan, System Resistance Network, the Daily Stormer and other organisations like that are not available as links on your platform and are put into those URL databases and other automatic systems you have?
As I said, I'm not familiar with the details of those accounts, but if we identify a breach, we will take action.
Okay, well, I mean, it's simply not good enough. I mean, these have been reported to on multiple occasions. Facebook, I similarly raised concerns with your own team directly about links to such organisations. Took you weeks again to remove links to Radio Aryan from Facebook after I had to get to the state of raising it directly with your staff here in the UK. Can you explain then why you've still got links to the Daily Stormer, Systems Resistance Network, and the link to some of these other sites, including Gab? I found a particular link last night that linked to a page that said, if Muslims are the bullets, the system is the gun in the hand of the Jew. Can you explain to me why Facebook is routinely allowing links to organisations, again, very well known, we're not talking about deeply hidden organisations here, that anyone can find within minutes on your platform?
Thank you, Mr. Dowdy. I want to be clear, and thank you for raising Radio Aryan. I think we were able to actually designate them as a hate organization and remove them from our platform within 1 week of you raising it to us, which is very fast. We have a very deliberate process, but thanks to your efforts there, we were able to do that. That's not to say that someone could share information about Radio Aryan on our platform that we would not find immediately. Once we're made aware of that, we would remove it. There is no room for praise, support, or representation of that organization or any of these hate organizations.
So why have you still got links this morning to Systems Resistance Network and the Daily Stormer?
I believe I know for a fact that Daily Stormer, we have what we call Black Hold, or shared to our URL database, that network. I'm not exactly sure what you have on your.
I've got multiple links here, Mr. Potts. Let me just. I mean, you know, you claim that these things are being looked at, and yet you can just find them. I mean, I can find page after page after page here, linking to their articles, showing their things, talking about. I mean, I won't use the terms, but utterly offensive terms relating to Jews, Muslims, black people. All they're in full view on Facebook here this morning. So clearly, your systems aren't working.
To be clear, we have 2.7 billion users on our platform that share billions of pieces of content every day, and we have millions of reports against that content. Some of that is proactive, some of that is based off user-generated. We do an extremely good job of finding this information and removing it when it violates our terms. That's not to say that anything is perfect.
I know, but these are direct links to the Daily Stormer website. Okay, so that's a very easy thing to search for. And we're not talking about a video that's been altered or music added. We're talking about the most basic thing, which is a link to a well-known neo-Nazi website, and it's all over your platform. Why is that not being found?
Mr. Dowdy, I'm happy to follow up with you after. I would need to see the actual link to make sure that it is one that we have identified and put into our URL base. It is the case that we put the top.
It's the link to its own website. It's the link to the actual website. I mean, it's there for everyone to see. It's the most basic thing.
I understand your concerns. I'm happy to take that feedback. I want to make sure that we are removing that. So if I can follow up with you after that.
So you will remove links to the Daily Stormer?
Absolutely.
Absolutely, and System Resistance Network?
Absolutely. They're both banned.
And you will proactively search for the range of neo-Nazi and far-right organisations that have been identified by groups such as Hope Not Hate?
We have long held that white supremacist organizations, far-right organizations that have, let me rephrase this. Our policies around terrorism and hate are ideological and apathetic. We do not care whether you claim to be a far left or a far right group. If you have a deep link to violence, a deep link to hate, we remove you. We designate you.
Well, you clearly don't, Mr. Potts. Can I turn to YouTube? Similarly, have you got content linking to Radio Aryan on your site?
As far as I know, no. We don't have.
As far as you know, no. Okay. Well, last night I found a link to one of their full radio broadcasts, again within a moment, which I'm sorry to use the words, talks about going after niggers and faggots. Okay. Full broadcast there from an individual providing multiple links to neo-Nazi organisations. I found another set of videos, music again, to white supremacist and neo-Nazi organisations. I found people providing links to Britain First, which, as you will be well aware, is an organisation which I believe has been banned from some of the other platforms. I found huge amounts of videos from far-right and Islamist organisations talking about going after gays, homosexuality and the campaign for immorality, advocating stoning, all sorts of different things. I mean, it's just a cesspit. Why are those links on your site?
Let me take a step back and put the things in a perspective. In looking at content when it's uploaded on the platform, we take in consideration two pillars. One is the law, the second is our policies. For what concerns our policies don't allow any kind of these abuses. So I really need to look into this content that you are reporting to me.
There's loads of it. There's loads of it. I mean, again, we're not talking about, deeply hidden content here. We are talking stuff in full public view. We're talking about basic links, link after link after link to neo-Nazi and far-right extremist organisations, all in the comment pages, people commenting on it afterwards, and not only that, but actual links to full audio recordings of neo-Nazi broadcasts advocating violence against Muslims, Jews, gays, the state, the violent overthrow of the state. I mean, how is that content getting through if you've got these policies in place?
I worked for years with NGOs from all over Europe on these kind of issues. In the context of the European Code of Conduct Against Hate Speech, we are working together with NGOs from 26 countries, now 27, and it absolutely is an important issue. We are focusing in that by improving, of course, the enforcement of our policies, working with experts and NGOs. Just to give you a number, in the last 2 years, thanks to the work that we have done with these NGOs in the context of the Code of Conduct, we were able to pass from a takedown rate for the referrals that we are receiving on these kind of issues across all Europe from 40% to 80%. So the situation is improving, but still, I fully understand that there are areas like the one that you are highlighting where we need to look into that.
I'm sorry. But why is it that every single time all three of your companies appear before this committee, members of this committee, including myself, the chair, and others, are able to find content within minutes? We're not talking about weeks of research or looking for complicated hidden stuff on the dark web or stuff that's been altered. We're able to find stuff within minutes or seconds. I mean, I was able to find the attack video in Christchurch within seconds on various of your platforms. I mean, this stuff. Your systems are simply not working, and quite frankly, it's a cesspit, and it feels like your companies really don't give a damn. You give a lot of words, you give a lot of rhetoric, you don't actually take action. You don't even know that this content is on there. You've been hearing for us this morning, and you haven't even looked up the organisations that we've raised. It's all on there.
We need also to remember that there are 2 billion of users that come every month on our platform to find content, to learn something, to share something. Of course, this is absolutely a horrific issue, and we need to do a better job in trying to understand, and we are doing actually a better job in trying to understand how to stay up to the threat. For example, something that I would like to mention, since the last hearing, we introduced a team that is called the Intel Desk that is dedicated to make sure that we better understand the trends of violation of our policies, of far-right organisation, of extremists.
Well, that's all wonderful, but they're clearly not doing a very good job, because quite frankly as well, I find it extraordinary that I can find all this hate content directed at the LGBT community on YouTube, and yet I know for a fact that you block and restrict a positive LGBT content by your own YouTube creators and block it so it's unrestricted. And yet last night I could find videos advocating violence and hatred towards the LGBT community. So quite frankly, your policies mean nothing because you're not following them through.
I've
had enough of listening to this.
I would like to look into this content and come back to you in any case if possible.
I mean, you're all three of you not doing your jobs.
John Woodcock.
Thank you, Chair. Could I take you briefly back to the issue of what you share and the requirements on you to share with law enforcement agencies? If the UK government put a requirement on all of you as companies to share the identifying IP address data with every for every account which breaches your policies, what would be your response to that?
I can tell that for my personal experience, we are also discussing these issues in the context of with the European institutions, in the context of the EU evidence initiatives, very similar to some of the ideas that, by the way, are also in the online arms white paper. And of course, the focus on trying to find ways to make sure that the e-evidence are preserved and there is a right level of collaboration with the law enforcement is something that we are very open to discuss.
And you all talk about active collaboration, and I'm sure that is the case on specific instances. But what would be the bar, or what would be your objection? Would you have no objection to simply routinely sharing that identifying data with the appropriate law enforcement agencies? Ms. Minshall, you made the case of needles and haystacks, and we can take that as read. But if a government says, actually, we want all of that data available as you either ban the user or restrict a particular piece of content, what would Twitter's response be?
But my understanding is that this is exactly the issue that the Cloud Act is intended to address.
But it doesn't go as far as that at the moment. No one is suggesting that. So are you being unspecific because you're not sure, or which is?
So as it stands, if there is a threat to life or serious harm, we can proactively reach out to law enforcement where we have relationships. US law would prevent us going beyond that, and for some time I think all of us have raised this as an issue, and the Cloud Act is intended to address that exact gap.
But if UK law, if the UK changed its law to require everything available to be routinely shared, yes, there is a different path which is going down, but it doesn't go as far as doing that. Could you do it? Would you object to doing it?
I think this is something I'd have to look at in terms of the implementation of the Cloud Act, the details of which I'm not sure. But I think it's also a question for the white paper that on online harms, in that there is a very thoughtful section on illegal content, and I think more detail on where the regulator ends and law enforcement begins would be very welcome.
No, indeed, but I mean, this is clearly a live issue, and there is an active debate about the level of responsibility being taken by your platforms, as we've seen today, as we've seen with every terrorist atrocity. So it's clearly a question being posed, and mechanisms in place. So I'm surprised that you can't give me an answer. If it's a bad idea, you need to tell us why it's a bad idea, because these are the directions where you're going to go down. Mr. Potts, did you have a view on this?
Thank you, Mr. Wilcock. I would say that we want to comply with law where we can.
Sure.
When there are different regulatory frameworks in different areas where, as Ms. Minshaw mentioned, where they conflict, we have to essentially deconflict those, make sure that we solve for those issues. We are a U.S.-based company. We operate internationally. We're a U.S.-based company, and we must adhere to the U.S.-based laws as well. We do respond to legal requests from government for that information. So if you request information about any of our users, data, location, we will comply with that if the request is legal, just.
So if the UK government makes a standing request that everything which every user who creates content which you then ban is therefore routinely shared.
Our standards, but not necessarily illegal.
Uh-huh.
If we have a specific proposal, I'm happy to take that back to the team because I want to make sure that I fully understand. It seems like a very grand.
Well, okay. Let's restrict this. Not necessarily offensive, but let's restrict this to terrorist-related activity. When there is clearly, all of you have platforms. All platforms. For all platforms, there is a very large volume of cases where you take down material but do not routinely or not required to share it with UK law enforcement agencies. If the UK passes a law to say you must automatically share that the IP data related to those accounts, which clearly you have, would you have an issue with doing that?
I'm happy to take that back to the team to get you a direct answer. I would want to just point out that, to make sure that I'm being clear here, that I try to fully process your question. Even within the space of terrorism and terrorism violating content, there are different levels. We spoke earlier about deliberate actors. Those are people that we want to ensure that they meet the correct due process. There are also other people that may be sharing for awareness, but not sharing in a way that sharing in a way that actually violates our community's policies. And if doing that would seem to be a bit overbroad. So, for example, if I want to share awareness of the attack in Sri Lanka, but I do it in a way that violates our policies, where it's not clear that you're condemning, you just kind of share something without a caption. So that puts us in a very difficult position to assess what someone's intent was behind the sharing. And so I would have some caution about that.
I understand that, and and that is of course a valid point. But you said at various points you've said that you want government's help with this. Now, if the government says if governments say we are taking control of terrorist policy, of overall terrorist policy, and we are instructing you to share that, and we will make the assessment as to what has been shared in a non-criminal way or what might have been below the criminal bar but nevertheless may want to flag up activity where a UK programme like Prevent may want to take into account. What I'm trying to get at is whether you think there are legal bars to applying that, whether you would have objections as a company. If you don't have the answer now, I would appreciate from the three of you a corporate response on this, unless any of you have anything to add just now.
I'm happy to take that back to our teams and review and follow up with your office.
Okay, thank you.
Chris Green.
Thank you. Ms Minshall, who's responsible for the content on Twitter?
There are many different teams who have a role in content on Twitter, from our engineers to our safety team.
So it's Twitter as a whole?
Yeah.
So Twitter's responsible for its content. So obviously individuals tweeting whatever they tweet and whatever they share, obviously it's a personal responsibility, but ultimately you're responsible for it. Does the content on Twitter reflect the moral character that you're broadcasting? Does it reflect your moral character as a company, as an organisation, for the stuff you're allowing to be broadcast?
Let me be very clear. Some of the examples that have been raised today and in this committee previously do not meet my personal moral threshold and are abhorrent, and our role is to identify that content as quickly as possible and remove it from the platform.
And within Twitter, within social media more broadly, there are teams of moderators looking at content and stopping it being broadcast or rebroadcast. How many people do that for Twitter?
If I could just give an overview of our strategy more broadly than just focusing specifically on the number of people we employ operationally. As I've said earlier, technology is critical for us as a company. Algorithms don't need weekends, they don't need to sleep. Not only does technology help us find content that breaks our rules, but it also helps us prioritise reports. It helps us block spam accounts without a human intervention. We suspended, or we saw about 230 million attempts in the first half of last year to come onto Twitter that violated our policies on spam.
So are these non-human interventions, are they fast enough? Are they good enough yet?
We've seen success in a number of areas. I think on the spam side...
Clearly there's a distinction between, the impression I got, between Facebook and Twitter. Clearly, in the response to Mr Doughty's points, the answers were far faster or a far better response from Mr Potts' organisations compared to yours. So why is that? Why aren't you keeping up?
Sorry, can you clarify the question?
In terms of some of the organisations that could, perhaps should, be prescribed.
On prescribed organisations, there are a number of groups that we prescribed several years ago with different platforms. And
well, not just prescribed, but other organisations which clearly don't share the values that Twitter would want to broadcast.
So what could you clarify the question there?
Sorry, there is significant, quite repugnant content on Twitter at the moment that has more effectively, it seems, been shut down on Facebook and other platforms than it has been on Twitter. Isn't Twitter keeping pace?
I'm not sure that that's a characteristic or a standard I would recognise.
Would you say you're keeping pace with other organisations?
Yes, I would say that we are in a very different place than we were 2 years ago, and regular Twitter users will have seen a step change. Mm-hmm. And we have indications that our automated systems are having an effect. On something like malicious automation, we're seeing the number of human reports go down because our tools are catching those attempts before humans see them.
Why are you unwilling to give a figure for the number of people involved in moderation?
I will share the figure. I just wanted to
okay.
give that context. We have 1,500 people working on policy enforcement and content moderation.
And what jurisdiction do these people reside? Are many of them in the UK? Is it the US? Where are they?
We're a global company and they're based all over the world.
so a fair distribution around the globe. Over time, there's increasing pressure from society, from politics for more and more censorship, essentially, more and more control. So at the moment, it doesn't seem as though what society would expect, but certainly what politicians would hope for, that you're actually meeting the mark. At what point do you think we would actually have the confidence that some of these extremist organisations would be excluded, or kind of would we expect it to be within a day?
You know, on scale, we see 500 million tweets
Yeah.
a day. 1 in a million happens 500 times, and we're never going to get to a 100% success rate in the near term on any of these issues.
Yep.
But you know, we look at our metrics compared to the same time last year. We're now removing 3 times the number of abusive accounts within 24 hours compared to the same time last year. And that uptick in speed has been independently validated by the EU Code of Conduct.
Would it, taking a slightly different approach, social media is used by all sorts of different people. We know, in society more broadly, we know who not to talk to, who to avoid. We know what, in terms of newspapers and things, we know what we don't want to see. Do we ultimately have to take the same approach with social media, in that we know there's going to be unpleasant, repugnant stuff on there, and we have to take a similar kind of approach that we would more broadly? And that's just something we have to accept. Is that what you would say?
That is a decision for lawmakers, and the government have put forward a proposal. I think from our perspective, there's plenty of really positive aspects to the white paper, not least the creation of a new regulator could be a big step forward. But to come back to you on some of the challenges, at the crux of any tech regulation is international enforcement. You know, there's over 2 million apps on the Android App Store. The overwhelming majority of those are not based in the UK and don't have people in the UK. So how you enforce a standard of behaviour across the internet that has the capacity to involve those organisations as well is the key question.
Yeah, so I don't think this tweet would get over the line in terms of being banned, but I think you'd appreciate... I'll just read you this tweet. It's of a video of actual Guatemalan soldiers beating young people. And it was put out by someone, I think, on the left of politics, who said, "Why does this secretly recorded video appear on your cowardly, show your cowardly soldiers brutally beating up Palestinian children again?" And that was directed to @Israeli PM. And the suggestion was that was the Israeli Defence Force. So that was a tweet that was widely seen on Twitter. So do you think at some point, and we know the context in the UK of anti-Semitism and the targeting of the Jewish community and the fears, the genuine fears and legitimate fears that the Jewish community have in the UK. This tweet wasn't taken down by Twitter. I think it was deleted by the person who put it up. Do you think this goes against your rules and it should have been taken down by Twitter? Is that the case now, or do you think perhaps in the future it would, as the rules are developed, it would transgress those rules?
On that tweet specifically, I will take it away because I'm not familiar with whether it would or would not break our rules, and I will come back to you. But on your broader question about content that doesn't break our rules, can we do anything? And I think the answer is yes, absolutely. There's a couple of things I'd point out. The first is we now take into account a number of signals in how we organise content in communal areas, like in search and in conversation, understand the level of toxicity, whether or not it violates our rules.
Yep.
And we found that approach somewhat successful. It's decreased abuse reports by 4% and 8% respectively. I think the other thing to point out as well is in a couple of months we're going to begin trialling in one of the countries in which we operate author-moderated replies, and that will give users the ability to hide replies they get to tweets. So I think there is plenty we can do beyond our rules to support people in the content they wish to see.
Thank you. Mr. Potts, for your organisation, in terms of moderation, in terms of the number of moderators, how many do you have at the moment?
Thank you, Mr. Green. We have over 30,000 people working in safety and security. 15,000 of those are content moderators.
15,000. So I understand that the committee was informed in December 2017 that the figure would be, by the end of 2018, it would be 20,000. Why aren't you reaching that target in terms of number of moderators?
I think we're still growing, and I think we will continue to be on track with growth in our content moderators. One of the big places of investment as well has been in our engineers and our artificial intelligence, which also does the job of what moderators do. We're able to surface much more content that way, proactively surface to moderators a better quality of report so that they can then apply our policies. In fact, we're very transparent about that. We have our Community Standards Enforcement Report, and I'm pleased to say that the next edition is coming out in May. And I believe that we are now over half through all of our abuse types surfaced proactively by our automation. So it's not relying on a user report, not relying on a human, but the AI is surfacing it to our reviewers to say, hey, this seems like it's violating, let's review it and let's remove it. And in that case, it's bearing fruit.
So you'd have in terms of artificial intelligence and the advantages that gives, obviously there's going to be some learning process, and over time artificial intelligence will be more and more effective. And that will also reduce that time between someone raising a concern with the police or with you and your assessment of that material and your response, therefore, to blocking it.
I think that's correct, Mr. Green. I think the way that we think about these issues is really prevalence as a metric, and what we mean by prevalence is, and I think Mr. Cancini mentioned, it's the views that any piece of content receives. So you want to try to limit those views. Now, if there's a piece of content that is on the platform for 1 minute, 1 hour, 1 day, and it never receives any views, it's probably less impactful than something that's getting hundreds or thousands of views. So by using artificial intelligence and automated technologies, when we are able to identify what is going more viral or what is receiving that engagement, it allows us to surface it and review it sooner.
Thank you. And with YouTube, there is a concern more broadly, like if you can respond to, in terms of the moderators, they're not necessarily employees of the company. So in terms of the moderators themselves, if they aren't employees of the company, how effectively can we hold you to account for the quality of their moderation?
So absolutely. Let me make a step back and give you an overview on the approach that we're having, and then I will answer to your very good question, Mr. Green. So in the last 2 years, we made progress in this specific space. We are now able, thanks to the technology that we have deployed, to for the 8.7 million of pieces of content that we removed in the last quarter of last year, the 71% of them were flagged by machine. Mm-hmm. And of this 71%, 73% were taken down with no views. And that's exactly the point that Neil was making. For us, the goal is really to reduce the number of views that violative content get on the platform. Because of course, the challenge will always be to make sure that we have less and less violative content. But this is, in a certain sense, out of the control of Open Platform. Mm-hmm. That's something that is also acknowledged in the Online Arms white paper. So reducing the number of views and working together, and that's the second point, people and machine working together in doing this job, that's, in a certain sense, is the key element. The third point is continuously update our policies, and we made 30 changes in the last month, so basically since the last hearing. It's also a way to keep up with this development, and the point that was made before about in the previous hearing as well, about the need to be proactive. I think this is something that we as an industry, we are now doing. And this Intel desk that we have at YouTube, our chief of the Intel desk is a former intelligence deputy of FBI, and is reporting directly to our CEO, and they discuss these issues. It's a way to region per region, market per market, understand where the threats is moving and is evolving. And that's on your point about moderators. On your question about moderators, first there is a mix of YouTube employees and external vendors helping us in doing this job in a scalable way. All of them have the same level of trainings and the same kind of trainings done by YouTube people. We created these trainings which last something between 3 and 6 weeks together with the external expert. So the moderators go through the same level of training, and they also go through the same level of development. So, of course, tenure, expertise, and understanding of the issue is something very important for moderators then to become more and more expert, and then to be dedicated to the more delicate issues, like, for example, reviewing proscribed groups or reviewing terrorist organization, where you need to understand the context, where you need to know the logo, you need to know the language, and then be effective. So all this aside, the element of making sure that there is a high standard that is across all the different reviewers is present, but it's very important to stress that the progress that we made were thanks to a comprehensive approach, which is including technology, people, and policies.
And in terms of the moderators, whether they work directly for you or not, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, whoever is held equally to account, whether it's your employees or whether it's a contractor.
Of course.
Yeah. Thank you.
Just to quickly clarify on that, on the figures. Is it right, YouTube, that less than 1% of the videos that are flagged to you by users for hateful, abusive content, for promotion of violence and extremism, or for harassment and bullying, less than 1% of them are actually removed?
Actually, I'm not aware of this metric.
Okay, isn't that the kind of figure that actually, or at least the sense of proportion that you ought to have? I mean, this is my understanding from your YouTube reports, that users flagged in the last quarter that you've got records for, so until December, there were around 12 million videos flagged by users for hateful or abusive content, violent, repulsive content, or promoting terrorism. And it looks as though in the same quarter you've got around 110,000 videos were removed. Now, it's not clear whether those ones that were removed also includes the ones that you've identified automatically, or whether that's just the ones that were flagged. So it might be a much smaller proportion of the ones that have been flagged to you.
So, just to summarize, and I hope I understood correctly your question. I think that in terms of efficiency, as I mentioned before, in the last quarter of 2018, what we've seen is that the 71% of the flags that led to removal were coming from machines. So, of course, machine, because they're working, thanks to algorithm, artificial intelligence, are very precise. Then we have another source of flags that are coming from our expert, the trusted flaggers. We work with in different countries. We have 6 organizations here in UK that are doing an incredible job. And also, for example, the police is part of these trusted flaggers. The efficiency in terms of the number of flags, of course, are much less than the one that's generated by machine, but the efficiency and the precision of these trusted flagger is very high, is high 80%. Then we have a normal user, and indeed